I thought it'd be interesting to have a look at what's going on, the Iran war, from an Iranian perspective.
Welcome back. We are again joined by Said Mohammed Marandi, a professor at Tehran University and also a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. So thank you for coming back on the program.
So an advisor, professor at the Tehran University and an advisor to the nuclear team. He's someone, this will be an Iranian perspective on the Iran war. And I thought that'd be interesting to hear.
Thank you for inviting me, Glenn. It's always a great honor being with you and your audience.
Well, we now see that the U.S. is well back into its renewed war.
You wouldn't be surprised there are hundreds already covered up in terms of deaths. Possibly, I've been wondering about that too. It's hard. I haven't heard about any leaks, and believe me, there's a bunch of people that would love to leak that stuff. A lot of people hate Trump, so I wouldn't be surprised if there are more casualties than we know of. But if there's a ground invasion, there will be type of casualties that can't be covered up, because there'll be FPV drone footage of soldiers dying, and so it'll be a completely different ball game.
War against Iran, it appears that the war will likely escalate beyond the targeting we saw in the former round. We also see the war possibly widening now as Yemen joins the fight, which means the Red Sea can be shut down. Saudi Arabia becomes much more vulnerable. Iran has focused, it seems, over the past few days, a lot of its attacks on Bahrain and Kuwait. I was wondering how we can understand this, the war now. What can we expect to see from Iran? How will it respond to the United States? Indeed, what is the objective of the U.S. this time around?
Well, the Iranians, as you know, and we've discussed this before, after the signing of the MOU, they never believed that the United States would fulfill its obligations. That was never anything that anyone here counted on. So what they did was that they thought that they used the brief period of time that the MOU was to remain partially credible to export a lot of oil. So Iran had accumulated a lot of oil on tankers in the Persian Gulf. They couldn't leave.
So the U.S. blockade was somewhat effective in stopping Iranian oil exports. So the memorandum of understanding, yes, it helped the United States get oil out, but it also helped Iran get oil out. So it wasn't complete loss for Iran.
Because of the U.S. siege. And then as soon as the MOU was signed, tens of millions of barrels were sent to the Asian markets. And after that, the Iranians were just emptying whatever they had on shore and sending them and bringing in ships with supplies because Iran's ports were blocked for 2 months. So critical supplies that were needed were imported, and oil and other energy-related exports were exported. That was probably the most important thing that came out of the MOU for Iran. Of course, the United States was pushing for oil to leave the strait, and the energy crisis was to a degree lessened as a result.
Yeah, this little splurge of oil, it helped.
But still, the global shortage of energy is still very much present for all of us, because 4 months, literally, there was a daily shortage that was accumulating. And it was not just oil and LNG, but everything. And actually, the oil shortage has been dealt with a bit in a better way than everything else, because disproportionately oil tankers were leaving the Persian Gulf, but other products and other goods that are necessary for the global economy, they are lagging. They were lagging far behind. Now, of course, the strait is closed. So the Americans began to violate the deal as expected. They refused to hand over Iranian stolen assets. They refused to force the Israelis.
Yep, the United States failed to live up practically everything on their side of the deal. They didn't get Israel out of Lebanon. They didn't unfreeze assets. They didn't lift sanctions. Instead, they imposed new ones. They tried to open a southern route through the Strait of Hormuz, challenging Iranian control over the straits. List goes on.
To leave Lebanon, these are all their commitments. They refused to stop threatening Iran. That's a part of the deal. Mm-hmm. They expanded sanctions, another violation. They reversed the lifting of the sanctions of Iranian oil exports, another violation of the deal. And so in general, they were doing, the only thing that they left was the siege. There was no siege. They wanted to be able to take the oil, but prevent Iran from being able to benefit from the MOU. And then they, of course, opened up this corridor, which was in violation of Article 5, because they wanted to undermine Iran's authority over the strait, which was recognized in Article 5 of the MOU. So for a couple of weeks, the Iranians kept warning the Americans. They warned tankers not to use the American corridor. But the countries that assisted the United States in the war, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Emiratis.
This is the Oman corridor that the United States opened to try to challenge Iran's control of the strait. And that got shut down. Lots of ships got attacked. I believe this passage is now mined. And so it's shut down for good.
They would send their tankers through that corridor. In other words, they were trying to undermine Iran alongside the United States. So ultimately, Iran had to, after warning tankers repeatedly, they struck a number of tankers, and the Americans bombed Iran, which of course is another violation. So Article 5 was violated because the Americans opened up their own corridor in violation of the agreement, and then of course they bombed Iran, and now they've shut the strait through a siege. So every element of the MOU has been undermined by the Americans. The objective of the Americans, of course, was to, since they lost the 40-day war, the Ramadan war, they lost the siege warfare, they lost at the negotiating table. What Trump was trying to do was trying to undermine the MOU and win the war through cheating the Iranians. So they would refrain from carrying out their obligations. They would take control of the Strait of Hormuz and in their dreams undermine Iran.
Exactly.
Whereas that was not possible beforehand. So the Iranians, they resisted again. They would not. They said that they're not going to allow the Americans to control the strait. And the battle that we're seeing now, the war that we're seeing these days, is the war over the Strait of Hormuz. The Americans are planning an invasion. I'm not saying it will necessarily happen. I'm not saying it will necessarily happen in the next few days. But they are.
I'm saying it needs to happen in next week, basically, in order to have any chance. After that, precision ammunition stockpiles of the United States begin to run low. The situation in the oil market worsens. It just becomes a worse time to launch a ground invasion. So I think the United States is going to hit all the targets it wants to try to set the stage for that during next week. And maybe even this weekend, they'll try launching some type of ground invasion, which will go terribly.
Have planned for an invasion. Whether they carry them out or not, we'll see. But the Iranians, as you pointed out, the focus of Iranian strikes are on Bahrain and Kuwait, and that's because that's where most of the American assets have been placed for a ground invasion. But of course, Iran is also striking U.S. targets in Jordan, in Qatar, anywhere in Iraq, anywhere where they feel that it's necessary to strike, they'll strike. This time around, of course, Iran struck American assets in Oman too, because Oman was being used against Iran. But that's where we are right now. The Americans are, of course, having much more difficulty in destroying Iranian targets because, as you know, Iranian targets are deep underground, key assets. When Iran wants to fire missiles or drones, they don't put them in inside buildings or in piles somewhere. They take out whatever they need, they fire them, and then they go back to their bases. Or they take out different missiles and drones, spread them out.
They keep everything they really need protected inside all of these mountains under hundreds of feet of granite.
Out on the in different areas, put them apart from one another so that the Americans cannot bomb them in large numbers. Everything has been spread out in Iran and placed underground. So the Americans, when they strike, they're not able to do much. On the other hand, U.S. assets are all on the land. They're not underground.
Yeah, because U.S. assets are in this flat part here, where you can't bury under a granite mountain. It's all flat, sandy terrain, and so very hard to dig down into.
And it's almost impossible to build underground bases anyway. Even if they do decide to build underground bases, it'll take the years. But in some of these countries, it's just not possible. The reason why Iran has been able to effectively build so many of these underground bases without the Americans being able to destroy them is because Iran is very mountainous. And in mountainous areas, these underground bases become much stronger. But in flat land and islands, the ground is not as such where you can protect your assets underground easily. So countries like Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, the shores of Saudi Arabia, and most of the Emirates, it's just not doable. But in any case, if they want to, they'll take years. So it's easy for the Iranians to destroy U.S. assets. What they have to do is destroy the radar systems, the electronic warfare systems, and then they just take out the buildings, the hangars, and whatever it is that they're targeting. So Iran has that advantage. And of course, Iran has been accumulating missiles and drones for decades now. And I think last night they introduced a new missile to the war. So and remember, the Americans were saying, Trump in particular was saying that they've wiped out all of Iran's missiles and drones. The Iranian
Yeah, those are obvious lies.
strikes on U.S. targets during the last few days have been very heavy, and they're just firing missiles and drones across the region at U.S. targets.
And I think that's because U.S. strikes against Iran have been heavy too. And we apparently took out 2 bridges in the last 24 hours. Don't think Iran has retaliated for that yet.
So we are where we are, and it's unclear where things are heading. The Iranians are determined to make sure that the Strait restrictions to the Strait are not removed until the United States implements its obligations in the MOU. Well, whether it's you call it the MOU or not, it doesn't matter. Iran wants the demands of the United States, force the Israelis.
So here's an update on that. Breaking, U.S. strikes 3 bridges, not 2, and a railway and an airport in southern Iran in overnight attacks in civilian infrastructure. So that is not great. Breaking, United States has gone mad. Yeah, that's a broken bridge.
دوستان وسط پل دوستان پل گریوه وسط ولی دادن.
That's, imagine one of the bridges you use every day is just destroyed like that. What a pain. At least it's not a bigger bridge, like a suspension bridge, but still. Iran will be striking back, and there are some pretty critical bridges that Iran can strike in the Middle East, like the bridge right here to Bahrain. If I was Bahrain and I helped the United States bomb bridges in Iran, I'd be shaking right now.
To leave Lebanon, to end the genocidal attacks, to hand over stolen assets, and so on. Otherwise, I'm quite certain that trade through the Strait of Hormuz will not normalize, even if the Americans halt the hostility, the military hostility.
Well, what do you see being the relevance of Yemen's involvement? Because what one sees a lot of countries being involved in this, but Yemen is very critical, it seems, given its geographical location. But you have to look at the geography as well as its capabilities, what it can actually do. So, well, how do you think, or to what extent is Yemen willing to get involved? Well, if we would assess it, what would be both the intentions as well as the capabilities of Yemen to contribute to this war?
I think Yemen and Iraq are both very important. In Iraq, we saw in the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei in the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala, many millions of people, unprecedented crowds. And for the first time during these funerals, as you know, the West has not...
There are a lot of Shia Muslims in Iraq, sorry. So, I think they're the majority of the population in Iraq. So Iraq could have a revolution.
Been able to downplay their importance. In the past, whenever there were huge gatherings in Iran, they would say thousands of people gathered, sometimes maybe tens of thousands of people. I don't recall often hearing there were hundreds of thousands. But this time around, they admitted that many millions participated in Tehran. I think it was 15, 16 million. And in Mashhad and Qom in Iran, 40-some millions collectively participated in Tehran. There were 3 days of gatherings. In Iraq, though, you had many millions of people. And that, I think, shows where the sentiments of the Iraqi people lie. And if the war escalates, that basically means that the Iraqi resistance has a mandate. So far, the Iraqi resistance has not been as active as it was 4 months ago. So it's clear that the resistance, the axis of resistance, the Iranians and their allies...
The Iraqi resistance shot down a U.S. refueling aircraft over Iraq and damaged another during the war. So they were active at one point during the 40-day war.
Have not gone up the escalation ladder that far yet. The same is true with Yemen. Yemen actually is a strange situation because if I was the Saudis, I wouldn't have done this. But the Iranians broke the siege against the people of Yemen. I recall a former American military official saying that he was on a ship in Yemen, a U.S. naval ship, enforcing the blockade, and they captured this small boat that was smuggling in medicine for Yemen. And they just took the medicine and dumped it into the sea. So this is how the United States and the West and the Arab regimes in our region, they've all been treating Yemen. They've been trying to starve the population, trying to make them suffer as much as possible. It's not dissimilar to Gaza. The war on...
Yes, Yemen for years and years and years was bombed, the Houthis in Yemen, by Saudi Arabia. What happened, changed that is they got long-range drones and started threatening Saudi oil infrastructure. And so Saudi sued for peace.
Yemen that was carried out for years by the Saudis and Emiratis with the support of all these other countries was a genocidal war like Gaza. But it failed. And Iran broke the siege. So it sent a passenger aircraft to Yemen in order to facilitate the movement of Yemeni officials to take part in the Iranian funeral. And when the plane was going back, the Saudis bombed Sana'a Airport, Sana'a International Airport, the capital's international airport. And that put the Iranian plane at risk, but also Yemeni citizens at risk. And Yemen retaliated. So the tensions between Saudi Arabia and Yemen have heightened.
So this was what happened. Saudi Arabia bombed the airport the Yemenis delegation were going to land at.
في هذه اللحظات مشاهدينا الكرام
Boom. And here is... They eventually landed at a different airport. Hey, James West. Just covering the situation in Iran from an Iranian perspective. This is former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiating team, so this is definitely an Iranian perspective, which is interesting to hear for a change. Nice to have you here, James West.
And that is bad news for Saudi Arabia. That's bad news for the United States. It has been said that the Americans put pressure on the Saudis to carry out this attack. I don't know if it...
I no doubt it's true, because it's so stupid for Saudi Arabia to attack the Houthis in Yemen when right now Saudi Arabia through a pipeline is getting like nearly 50% of its oil out, and by the Red Sea. And so provoking the Houthis to close down the Red Sea, not a smart move by Saudi Arabia. They must have been pressured to bomb the airport.
But that's true or not. I don't have any information, but I have heard this from a couple of credible, generally speaking, credible people, but I have no proof for it. So the situation in the Red Sea, therefore, is much more dangerous than it was before because of the rising tensions between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. What can Yemen do? Well, they can stop the flow of oil from the Red Sea to the Asian markets very, very easily if they strike any of the super tankers. If they even hit one super tanker, that will affect trade immensely because insurance companies and tanker companies will rethink sending their ships into the Red Sea. If they strike...
Sounds good, Proton Snail.
Saudi oil and energy assets, that will be catastrophic too. You recall what ended the dirty war against Yemen was near the end of the 7 years, the Yemeni armed forces began to strike back. They had acquired drone and missile capabilities, so they destroyed Saudi export capabilities. And the Saudis quickly accepted a ceasefire. So one would assume that those capabilities that existed back then have not disappeared. If they strike the Saudi oil capabilities, oil export capabilities, it would be catastrophic for the Saudis, but also for the United States. That's why I think that U.S. pressure on Saudi Arabia to carry out this attack was foolish. Because now that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, if anything happens to Saudi exports, which are roughly anywhere between 3 to 4 and 4.5 million barrels a day, based on different estimations, that would, I think, bring a very sharp rise in the price of oil. But so far, we haven't seen Yemen do that. We haven't seen the resistance in Iraq make a move, and we haven't seen the resistance in Yemen make a move.
If there is a ground invasion of any type into Iran, all the Trump cards that Iran is holding back, like the Shia in Iraq and the Houthis, will go into action. Hezbollah too.
That would, in my opinion, mean that the Iranians they want to manage this escalation rather than carry out all-out war.
Well, as you said, the years-long war against Yemen came to an end when Yemen was able to target the economic interests of Saudi Arabia. And when Trump, I guess reluctantly, signed the MOU, he also referred to the need to get energy through the Strait of Hormuz, as the US only had a few weeks left of oil. So obviously, the economic pressures are quite important here. I mean, especially when fighting a massive country, a great power like the United States. But again, the war hasn't been over for that long. How is the state of the economy now? How much oil has the Americans been able to get through? And well, can they essentially go on for months now? Because I'm just wondering, how is the situation of the global economy now? Because when one tries to assess how this war is going to go, yes, one can look at the capabilities that the Americans were able to accumulate, the Iranians, what kind of weapons they were able to develop, but also, the economic resilience. As you said, the Iranians were able to get a lot of their ships through. But what is the overall state of the global economy here? Because it doesn't seem like this was enough time.
On the edge of a cliff is the answer.
For what J.D. Vance said, we need to buy some time to get oil flowing again. But this was not a lot of time.
Well, the irony is that if the United States had just allowed the MOU to move forward, by now the flow of oil would have normalized.
Not completely, but he is right in that, you see, it was going up, then the United States started doing its shenanigans in the Strait of Hormuz, and it went back down. It'd probably be, 70% of the way up to normal. Probably need another month or two to be fully open for various reasons. The mines, just the nervousness of ship captains to go into the Persian Gulf at a time of possible war.
But they tried to take control, and they tried to undermine Iran, and now we are where we are. But for a period of time, according to Vance's his own interview, let's accept his numbers, 20 million barrels of oil a day left the Persian Gulf. That is, I don't know if that includes the Red Sea or not. If it doesn't, then more oil than normally would leave the Strait of Hormuz, leave the Persian Gulf, left for the global markets during this period of time. Let's say that he's not including the Red Sea. And it's logical. I mean, it's possible because these tankers were already in the Persian Gulf and full of oil, so they were just waiting to leave. But new production isn't necessarily taking place. So for a few weeks or a few days or a few weeks, it's these tankers could all quickly leave. But then afterwards, we'll have to see if new tankers will be entering the Persian Gulf in sufficient numbers, and whether
I'd be very, very, very nervous about going into the Persian Gulf right now. The Strait of Hormuz being closed 2 separate times, a ship just sunk. Nah, I wouldn't want to go in there with my $1 billion ship, because some of these ships are $1 billion ships.
production in the countries in the Persian Gulf can be normalized. So you may have a sudden rise in the amount of oil that exists that comes from the Strait of Hormuz, but that is not sustainable necessarily. And from my understanding and from what I've heard from experts, it isn't sustainable. But if it's, let's say, 20 million barrels a day, and it's even more than normal, it still won't make a big difference because the shortages are enormous and the daily consumption hasn't changed drastically. So at most, let's say 3-4 million extra barrels of oil were coming to the market a day for, let's say, 3 weeks. That during this period that the Strait of Hormuz has been shut again, I think it's equals that. The excess amount that went to the markets has now been canceled by the fact that during the past few days the strait has been closed. And so for now on, every day that the strait is closed, it's going to create an increasingly dangerous situation. Because as you rightly pointed out, when Trump was attacked by literally everyone for the MOU and giving Iran all those, and accepting all of Iran's demands, he said that we only have 4 weeks left of oil supplies. And he also said that he gave the example of Herbert Hoover and the Great Depression. So he didn't want to preside over that. So
but it looks like you're going to preside over that, Mr. Trump.
If we look at the fact that there was some extra oil leaving the Persian Gulf because it was already ready in the tankers, and the fact that nothing is leaving now, I would say that from now on, the shortages, we go back to where we were when Trump made that statement. Let's say 4 weeks of supply. Again, this is just a general.
I think actually we're worse than back then. This little blip, that's nowhere near what the full opening. Yes, it was a lot of oil, but no. Consumption is still where it was before, and that's not enough.
Estimate. But I don't think that this situation is sustainable for long. It may be more than 4 weeks. I mean, Trump is not known to be honest. He may have just said 4 weeks to create fear so that people would stop criticizing the MOU. It could be 6 weeks. It could be 8 weeks. But the crisis is getting worse by the day. And then, Glenn, there's also the fact that during these few weeks, these like 3 weeks when the oil was leaving the strait, first of all, not nearly as many tankers were entering the strait. That's really important for the future. And second of all, so the tankers were mostly leaving and fewer tankers were entering the strait. So in future, if there's an agreement and the strait is opened, it will take more time to get oil out.
There won't be this type of huge rush of tankers out of the straits as soon as it opens this time, because a lot of tankers that wanted to get out got out, and not that many went in. So opening the strait again will take more time next time.
And in addition to that, the fact that these countries restarted exporting and now they have to shut it down again is going to do increase damage to the oil wells. So there's going to be the consequences of restarting this situation are going to be significant, and I think that the long-term consequences will be felt even if the situation is resolved. But this time around, I don't see the Iranians normalizing the Strait of Hormuz anytime soon, unless the United States fulfills its MOU obligations. Whether it's within the framework of the MOU or not, this time the Iranians are not going to open it without getting major concessions.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned that because that was a question of mine. That is,
Yeah. By the way, I've talked about that I thought this would be resolved like in August, end of August. What I see happening is lifting sanctions because that's needed. What's needed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz is recognizing Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz. United States will do that. And then one reason a lot of ships aren't using the Iran's route is because they need to pay a toll. And if they pay a toll, that might violate U.S. sanctions and they'd be hit by sanctions. Therefore, they don't want to do it. So the United States will have to lift sanctions, at least in regards to paying the toll. And then if that happens, then ships might feel confident going through the straits and paying the toll, and the straits will reopen. I don't know if there'll be a formal agreement between the United States and Iran. There doesn't need to be one. All it needs to do is stop trying to contest Iran's control over the straits and lifting the sanctions to the extent that now ships can pay the fee without fear of being hit by U.S. sanctions. And then oil flow will begin to resume.
It's the possibility for diplomacy now. From what I understand, in Iran, let's call them the Hawks, made the warnings that Hawks, it seems predictable that, as you said, the U.S. wouldn't implement the MOU, but this was essentially the argument for continuing the fighting. It appears that, their argument won through. That is, that they were correct. The U.S. would not live up to this. So you would assume that the more hardline views within Tehran would now gain some momentum. So what is the possibility now of diplomacy? Because, again, if you want to put in the wider context, that is the JCPOA, which was never implemented by the U.S. and then there was...
At this point, I'm certain of it, Iran is just waiting for the shortage. It's nearly there. You have President Trump's admitting that they were 4 weeks away from a shortage. So Iran's just going to wait till that happens. There's no reason in the world at this point for Iran to negotiate before that. Just wait for the United States to come begging as it runs out of oil.
It's true, then there was 2 attacks on Iran while there were claims they were close to a deal. One just gets the impression that diplomacy is a mere instrument to regroup and shape the battlefield.
The stonks are crashing. Yep. Well, the war is back on, and that's not good for stocks. But overall, yes, they went down today, but they have a lot farther to fall. They have a lot farther to fall. Like down around here. But I think the stock market crash, that's going to, as long as the AI boom is going, the AI bubble, it won't crash completely. So it'll be hurt by a shortage of oil. I think it'll be a little bit later when the stock market starts to crash. It all depends what's going on with AI stocks.
More favorably. So given that diplomacy now has been...
and hi, Quantum Traveler. Nice to have you here.
Destroyed or diminished to such an extent. What is Iran's approach now to further talks with the U.S.? Because on one hand, yes, I wouldn't trust the U.S. Either if I was sitting in Tehran. On the other hand, at some point, one needs to talk to come to put an end to this whole thing.
It's interesting, and you're absolutely correct. There have been divisions, and we've discussed this together before, in Iran about the way forward. And after the MOU, there was a divide about how to deal with the United States. Some were saying that the MOU is decent enough. We have to export our oil and import critical goods, and if the Americans don't abide by the MOU, we'll just refrain from easing up on the Strait of Hormuz. Others were saying that we should have just continued with the war and we shouldn't have signed the MOU. Now, who was right and who was wrong? I think all of them, there was a consensus that the MOU wouldn't last. But there were differences in the fact that the MOU was signed in any way. that the Iranians came to this. Though that gap is
In addition to allowing Iranian oil to get out past the U.S. blockade, so they benefited from that, it also helped Iran in terms of its allies, China and Pakistan, and to a lesser extent India, in that it showed, hey, we tried the MOU. It's the United States didn't live up to it, so now we're closing the strait again. If they hadn't even, if the United States was offering to agree to all of Iran's demands, and if Iran didn't accept that, it makes Iran look bad. So, to some extent, they had to accept the MOU, even if they knew the United States had no plan to live up to their side of the agreement.
has lessened because now we're back in war. So the Iranian politics is more divided, it's more united. Now, Vance said something on last night on Rogan's show, the Joe Rogan show. That was nonsense. He was saying that in Iran there are these two factions. Some are reasonable, some are crazy, and the reasonable ones said we shouldn't have hit the ships. That's all nonsense. I mean, nothing in Iran happens without a mandate from the Supreme National Security Council. The guards, the army, no one has the ability to just go fire missiles or fire drones or anything like that. That's simply not going to happen. And in Iran, as I said, the only reason why Iran struck those ships was because the Americans were violating the MOU, and those ships, the governments that controlled those ships, were assisting the Americans in the violation. And the Iranians were not going to accept that, because if you allow the Americans to undermine the deal, then they will undermine you. So Iranian politics is united today.
No, Iran attacking those ships in the Mani Passage made complete sense. Yeah, I'm sure it wasn't just some renegade groups of Iranians deciding to lob missiles. No, they hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ships in a 24-hour period. Then they hit like 3 or 4 more and sunk one after the United States started their round of bombing. That was approved by Iranian leadership. So basically the IRGC troops around here were told, shut down this Amani route, and they did that.
More united than it was a week ago. On the other hand, if you've listened to what J.D. Vance was saying on the show, it's clear that politics in the White House are not all that united. J.D. Vance seems to be speaking a very different language than Trump and others around Trump. But also, in addition to that, you see the
Poor Vance. I wouldn't want to be Vance. He's going to be dragged down by this Iran war, just the same as Trump, despite, I'm sure, not having been excited about it. But he was picked for his loyalty. Trump picked Vance because he seemed to be like he would be a loyal vice president, and he's been loyal in that he's going down with a ship over the Iran war. The only way he could have survived politically is to be outspoken against the war from the very beginning, to the extent that it undermined Trump, and he didn't do that. So, Rubio too, they're finished because of this Iran war.
attempt by the Trump to get to have an additional budget for the war, for the Pentagon, for the Secretary of War. Attempts to increase the budget have been met with strong resistance from the Democrats because they see that the American population is opposed to the war, and Democrats disproportionately, almost universally opposed to the war. So you see resistance to that. If that resistance continues, that's going to make it difficult for Trump to continue waging the war because he needs the extra money. So Vance is not doesn't seem to be in full coordination with Trump. The Senate and the House may create problems for Trump in continuing the war. So while the political scene in Tehran is more united today with the start of the war, in the United States it seems to...
The funeral of the previous supreme leader, I'm sure, did a big job in unifying Iran and its leadership and hardening resolve.
Be much more divided. And this, I think, means that there may be opportunity in the future to force the United States to change its policy, but the Iranians are not interested for the time. So I don't think that we're going to have a ceasefire anytime.
No, Iran want the oil shortage, because the oil shortage, like panic around the world, like actually running out of jet fuel for planes in the United States, running out of diesel for trucks. Once that happens, Iran has set real deterrents. The American people, a lot of them just don't care about this Iran war. It's not really impacting their lives. Yes, maybe gas prices went up $1, but it's not the end of the world. Whatever, it's Middle East. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the war, but yeah, it's not impacted everyday lives. Once the oil shortage starts and it impacts everyone's life in the United States, people will care. Next time that Trump starts talking about war with Iran next year, if he tries to attack Iran again after 6 months of peace, people in the United States will go ballistic. They'll remember, yeah, you attack Iraq, you attack Venezuela, it doesn't matter to me. You attack Iran, you fuck with the world's oil again, we'll have a shortage and it'll impact my life. People will see the connection directly. They will not be having of it. Public opinion will be enormously against striking Iran again. And Trump's hands will be tied. He will not be able to bomb Iran again. And to get to that dynamic, Iran needs to hold the Strait of Hormuz closed long enough for the oil to simply run out. And they're very, very close to that point.
So I think that this is going to continue for a while. And then what the Iranians will want is the United States to actually implement the deal or implement certain demands. The Iranians are not going to accept any new piece of paper. They're going to say, you carry these out, and then the strait can be normalized. Now, Trump may be able to say that he spoke to some of his imaginary Iranian friends and imaginary Iranian leaders, and that they gave him everything he wanted.
Yeah, once the oil shortage starts, Iran will have such leverage that the United States will have to concede everything first before Iran opens the straits.
And they gave him bigly gifts and that sort of thing, and then justify another retreat. And that may be the case, but I don't see the Iranians going back to the negotiating table at all until action is taken. So it doesn't matter to the Iranians what the Americans say. The Iranians, as I said, didn't trust them back then. The Iranians thought this was, the MOU provided an opportunity for swiftly bringing in supplies and exporting oil. So I think that the next few days, I'd be very surprised if the United States halts operations.
It wasn't just Iran that got in supplies. The United States also got in their own supplies, resupplied their bases with cargo ships during that period.
In the next few days. But even if the United States does, I think that Iran will continue to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed until the United States implements what it promised to do. Whether you call it the MOU or anything else, the Iranians want those demands to be met. Otherwise, there won't be the free flow of oil or anything else through the strait.
Well, I just want to circle back to something you said earlier on. That is that the situation in Iraq has also shifted to a great extent as a result of this war. And indeed, I've seen some reports that there's been some fighting close to the Iraqi border with Kuwait. And I was just wondering, what is the overall relevance here of Iraq? Because again, I think for the United States, ideally, and I'm not saying that's not a possibility anymore, but ideally they would want to use ground troops. Usually they fight with proxies. You use other people, so you use Ukrainians against Russia.
Yes, Ukrainians against Russians. Yes, have other people do the dying.
You use Filipinos, for example, against the Chinese, but Iraqis would ideally have been an instrument for the United States to be used again against Iran. You, as a veteran of the Iraq-Iran war, I don't have to tell you, of course, but what is the relevance now of Iraq? I mean, can they play a significant role in this war on the side of Iran?
Yes, no doubt. I mean, the Americans do use proxies against Iran. The Kurdish terrorists in northern Iraq and other terror groups, they exist there. They train there, and they're funded. And the Iraqi local government, the Kurdish government, tolerates them. So they have bases, and the Iranians are bombing them literally every day. Also, you have the Wahhabi, Salafi, Takfiri elements in Pakistan's Baluchistan, where Pakistan doesn't have much control. They are trained, they carry out operations in Iran, and we've seen more activity in these two areas than before. But these groups won't be able to do anything important. They don't have that capability. Their numbers are small. So if the Americans want to carry out a land operation, they'll have to do it themselves. And the places where the Americans are being prepared or have been trying to prepare themselves for potential land operation one is Kuwait, and the other is Bahrain. That's why they're being attacked disproportionately. Anything that could be linked to a land operation against Iran is being bombed in these two countries. Now, this land is important. From what I'm hearing from Iranian people who know a thing or two about the military, the U.S. bombing of Iran is being carried out in a way which would be appropriate for ground invasion.
Yep, that's what I'm hearing from everyone. It's a shaping operation for some type of suicide mission on the ground.
The targeting, the places that are being bombed are more appropriate for land defense. Now, Now, the reason why this surprises me a bit, and it surprises the Iranian military, is that now is not the time for land operations because the heat and the humidity in the Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah, that's something now I'm remembering it from back when the 40-day war was going on and they were whisperings of a U.S. ground operation. People at the time were saying, well, now is the time for a ground invasion. It's still spring. It's still relatively cool. Actually, it was the end of winter. It would have been a good time for a ground invasion. Now, during the summer, during this heat, oh my God, just ignoring the FPV drone swarms that I'll be meeting whoever's going into Iran, just the heat alone will make the whole process miserable.
And in the Persian Gulf is very high. It's like in the high 40s, and the 50 degrees, over 50 degrees, and the humidity is like 100%. Especially
like 100, 110 degrees with high humidity, because it's right next to the Red Sea and a lot of humidity coming from that.
Actually on the other side and around the Strait of Hormuz, around the Persian Gulf, immediate surrounding of the Persian Gulf. So if the Americans want to take islands, it will be hell on earth. When they'll be in their uniforms and they'll be running. And during the day, that would be very dangerous to do. Troops could die as a result of the heat very easily. So now is not the best time to carry out a land invasion. The Iranians were, as I said, the Iranians did not believe the Americans would carry out the MOU. The Iranians believed that the Americans would, if they carry out a land invasion, they would do it in late September or after late September, when the temperatures begin to cool. They would still be hot, but they would not be as horrible and difficult as now, which would be terrible for morale. And I'm sure that U.S. soldiers in the region, their morale is very low. Because the Iranian soldiers, they go home. Even in the more difficult areas near the Persian Gulf region, difficult meaning the heat and all that. But for the Americans, they're just based in a terrible, under terrible circumstances, and their equipment is not well protected.
Here, let's have a look. Average annual temperature in the Middle East. This is average annual, so this is the summer. It's above this. Oh, it's scorching hot. In all this area, and more inland here. There's some places of Iran that are more moderate, especially, I guess, higher up in the mountains, deeper inland. But, oh my God, this entire Persian Gulf is just swelteringly hot.
Dust storms, the humidity, the heat, it's definitely not good for any of the equipment, the hundreds of billions of dollars of worth of equipment that has been brought to the region. So, but the pattern is that of an armed forces that wants to carry out a land operation. So whether they do it or not, I don't know. The Iranians are hitting very hard, and they are prepared for land war. They've been preparing for decades.
Trump was stupid enough to bomb Iran's supreme leader. He's stupid enough to launch a ground invasion into Iran. That's my position.
The Iranians, we discussed this too during the 40-day war before on your show when I said that the Iranians actually want the Americans to carry out a land invasion. And the same is true now, because they felt that if there was a land invasion, they would win. The Iranians would.
Yes. No question. A country of 90 million, mountainous fortress, tons of FPV drones, fortifications built over decades, planning for this exact type of commando raid for decades. Yes, everything would favor the Iranians winning, whatever the U.S. tries.
The Iranians would let them take some islands, they'd let them take parts of the mainland, wherever they want to go, and then they would start hitting them, and American soldiers would be very vulnerable. And supporting those soldiers would be very difficult because other side of the Kuwait is far away, Bahrain is far away. The logistics of an operation would be very difficult and very difficult to sustain. So the Iranians believe that if the Americans carry out a land operation, that would actually end the war sooner because this would be the final defeat. But that didn't happen back then, and the Iranians...
Yes, if there were hundreds of dead Marines coming back to the United States in body bags, that would... probably be a deciding blow to Trump's popularity. It would end this war.
Are planning for it now, but they're just surprised that the Americans are conducting themselves in a way at the moment that would be appropriate for a somewhat imminent land invasion, or a land invasion that would be carried out before late September.
Well, if the U.S. Would do a land invasion, and again, I've seen the same, the reports that obviously every day I see Kuwait and Bahrain especially being hit very hard. My last question is just about Saudi Arabia, though. To what extent do you think they might involve themselves in such an operation? Because if you want to seize any Iranian islands, for example, or even try to invade the Iranian mainland, you would think they would need the Saudis.
You know, Glenn, the real issue, I think, it was just announced a few hours ago again by the military, that if Iran's critical infrastructure is targeted, they will destroy everything. And they said that during the 40 days.
They've said that, yes. And again, 3 bridges hit in Iran. So it's going to be a major retaliation over that.
War as well. But a land invasion would mean destroying critical infrastructure by nature. You'll be taking territory, you'll be destroying it. So I think that all of these countries are at risk. And Saudi Arabia in particular is at risk from the Red Sea and from Yemen too. I don't see, I mean, the problem is that these countries recognize that their interests are not in fighting against Iran. But in the case of Kuwait and the regime in Bahrain,
But that's problem with being a U.S. puppet state is that you're a puppet, and the United States pulls your strings. And even if it's pulling your strings to commit suicide, you do it because you're a puppet.
they are, I mean, maybe the regime in Bahrain is, I mean, it is very dependent on American support to exist. But Kuwait
Exactly.
and Bahrain have shown a particular hostility towards Iran during the last few weeks. But if there is a land war, the Iranians will not continue just focusing on these two countries. If Iran's critical infrastructure is taken out on these islands or the United States occupies them, then I don't think Iran will retaliate. And the armed forces have said that all critical infrastructure in the region will be destroyed. If that happens, that brings an end to these countries. Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar,
Yep.
and Oman too, now that they've been helping the Americans.
Again, this is the temperature in this region. You take out the power to these places, no AC, it's unlivable. It's literally unlivable.
They can't survive if Iran strikes their critical infrastructure, because these countries are they're desert countries. They don't. I mean, Iran is a country you've visited. Iran has forests. Iran has rivers. Iran
As
has
mountains.
Iran it has deserts, but it has everything else too. Iran is almost self-sufficient in agriculture, despite
I mean, just look at the map. Iran is very different than the Gulf states. Gulf states just flat desert. Iran has the mountains.
the sanctions. If it wasn't for the sanctions, Iran would be more than just self-sufficient. And this year we've had a pretty good rain, better than average, slightly, whereas we had a drought for the last 3-4 years. So if there is all-out war, and if they try to take Iranian territory, if they start striking Iranian critical infrastructure, as Trump has threatened to do, Iran doesn't want to go there. But that would mean all-out. And we've seen, I'm sure you've seen the footage of Iranian missile strikes and drone strikes during the last few days. Very precise.
And Trump has been warning that he's going to attack energy and bridges over the next week. And they're already starting to do that now. That might intensify. And yeah, it's going to be very messy in the Middle East.
Better than before. It's clear that the missile capabilities of Iran are being enhanced, both in quality and quantity. And Iran can easily take out the key oil-producing assets, the key gas-producing assets, the key electrical power plants, and they're not that many in these countries. They're big and close to Iranian borders. Iran doesn't even have to use its long-range missiles. In fact, during the last few days, Iran has not been using more than a handful of its long-range missiles. It's been using short-range and medium-range missiles and drones to strike. And only on a few occasions, probably just for, practice.
The range of Iranian drones. See, most of the Gulf states, like Bahrain, are within majority their shortest range drones. It's really easy for them to just take out that infrastructure easy because they've got tens of thousands of those shortest range drones.
Did they use long-range missiles? So this I think, is the biggest danger. So Saudi Arabia is in a very particularly dangerous situation because
I don't know if it's true, but I heard Ukraine is winning in Russia. Well, let's look at the deep state map. This is a map run by the Ukrainians. And let's go back, let's say 2 months. June, May. Let's see the change. It seems like it's all going one direction. No, Russia keeps on taking more and more territories. It's on the verge of taking the last big fortress towns. And, yeah. Yeah, but the Gulf states got those EMP blast box for the drone defense. Well, I don't know how long those will last against endless waves of drones. Yeah, Russia is taking some hit from terrorism and from the drone campaign by Ukraine, but in the last 3 weeks, there haven't been any big hits from those drones. Like, Russia's air defense is dealing with them. And so, yeah, Russia's taking hits, but it's winning.
It is the only country that continues to export oil through the Red Sea, through the Strait of Hormuz. That's not possible anymore. But it's antagonized Yemen, and the Yemenis are not going to back down. On the other hand, if the United States carries out a land invasion, that means by nature targeting Iranian.
That would be a good thing in one way, is that it means this Iran war would be coming to a resolution far sooner, because the United States would come to a very clear strategic defeat in whatever operation it tries for the entire world to see. And yeah, the videos of FPV drones will be devastating to Trump.
Critical infrastructure, because
Ukraine sure is hammering their oil industry, though. Yes, but they're not causing lasting damage. Like, it's like, think of it as shooting someone with a BB gun is what Ukraine is doing. And now they've added 2 more people, so 3 people shooting someone with a BB gun. Yes, it hurts, but it's not doing permanent damage. But you start doing it long enough and the damage accumulates. I mean, if you shoot enough, you can kill someone with a BB gun. So that sort of situation. It's Russia's dealing with it right now, but it's not something they can just keep on taking forever. So something's going to have to change.
You'd be taking that territory. And if Trump carries out the threat to strike Iranian bridges and electrical power plants, then I would say that these countries would probably cease to exist. And remember, in these temperatures, people would have to leave immediately. They would have to go to Iraq or Yemen or Syria, but they most certainly won't be able to stay anywhere near the Persian Gulf region.
This is incredible. I think
Massive evacuation if the power in the region gets hit, and it'll be a complete disaster.
the key lessons from the war against Iran has, in my opinion, been that the illusion of escalation control is quite dangerous, and I think the U.S. still hasn't really embraced that lesson as we now see.
No. This is a much simpler lesson from the Iran war. Don't bomb Iran's supreme leader if you don't have a plan to deal with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. That's the number one only lesson that's really worth learning from that. Because there was no plan at all from Trump's part for what happened if Iran didn't collapse in the first 3 days. It was like, bomb supreme leader, and then 3 days later, the government didn't collapse. Okay, ceasefire? And Iran says, no, close the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump is fucked. That is how it goes. Anyway, I think this was a great video, and it was interesting hearing from someone who was part of Iran's nuclear negotiating team. He traveled to Pakistan during the 40 days of war when they were still trying to hash things out. So he is connected, and he would know what the sentiment among leadership in Iran is. And hearing it from him, they aren't interested in negotiating at the moment, at all. They want concessions from the United States first, and with concession that Trump isn't at the moment willing to give. So we're at a complete impasse, and we just have to wait till the oil to run out. And then things will finally start moving towards a resolution. Not in Trump's favor, though. I've said it from the very first day of the war. Bombing Iran's supreme leader was a presidency-ending decision. And I haven't changed my views. Anyway, this will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.